brief introduction to myself and a quick overview on quickly who StreamElements are and what we do, because we're new into the market and I think it might give some insights into why we're on this panel.
Great. So firstly, thank you so much to Brand Innovators for having me. I'm really looking forward, Michael, to our chat. I'm Victoria Sjardin. I joined Kraft-Heinz 3.5 years ago as the VP for marketing for what was our EMEA zone, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I just moved in January to a new role, so VP of Marketing Excellence across international, which encompasses EMEA, Asia, Latin America, really with a remit there of accelerating our transformation, right? So across media, digital, creativity, insight, amongst other things. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, quickly, I think the beginning of my career was somewhat started at MediaCom, as Lisa inferred. So my background is in the last 15 years, a mixture of buy-side and sell-side roles. Spent the last 10 years focusing primarily on gaming, which over the course of the last year certainly has seen a lot of traction in the marketplace in terms of time spent for obvious reasons. I've recently started at a business called StreamElements. So StreamElements is essentially, just a quick overview, is a kind of operating system that is used by streamers to create their content. When they're going live, they use our systems to engage, but also to monetize their audiences. And we tend to see that content across YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And so very, very kind of at the cutting edge of streaming technology, which is again probably at the cutting edge of what we're looking at as an industry. So look, let's kind of move quickly into the questions. I'm really excited about this conversation because although we only spoke briefly, there was some really good insights that you were able to give me that I'm sure the audience is looking forward to hearing. So look, we're here to talk marketing innovation. So let's talk some kind of more top line broad brushstrokes. You know, you've had a successful career and you've worked at some very substantial blue chip companies. What have you really taken as lessons, I guess, from those companies and what innovation really means to you in the terms of marketing for those brands?
So if I think about moments when the kind of aha came in terms of innovation, I'd like to think of it in 3 ways. So I think the first thing is you really need to understand your brand and understand your consumer and understand your business model. And I can give you some examples. Years ago, I was responsible for Vaseline petroleum jelly. Okay. Now it's a ubiquitous product. It's in households all over the world. And when we think about what innovation means there, talking to consumers as diverse as marathon runners in America, new mums with babies in the UK, women in South Africa and India who are using petroleum jelly as a daily skincare, similar to a moisturizer. And really trying to understand how could we innovate this global product to add value to that very diverse consumer group. And this is where I think the innovation of your product offering comes in. And we did a lot of understanding, and what we found was actually the value we could add, because if you think about, you know, why do we innovate? We innovate to create value, to draw consumers, customers to us, to create value for our businesses. The biggest innovation we could bring to them was actually going from a kind of easy on off cap to a flip top cap.
Right.
It sounds so basic, right? Why? Because if you're using this as a sports person, having a lid that falls off in your bag, if you're a rugby player, if you're a marathon runner, there's nothing more annoying apparently than petroleum jelly with bits of mud in, with your gym kit in. So for that consumer group, it was like, yes, amazing, right? If you're a new mum and you're trying to hold a baby in one hand, and if anyone's ever tried, for those of you who've got kids, right, trying to hold babies whilst doing things with your other hand, it's really hard. You put a flip top on a 750 kg pot of Vaseline, brilliant. You've now got a one hand opening mechanism that allows you to use that product while holding a baby. And for the ladies we spoke to in South Africa, where actually there's a whole category, just that dial up of something that added a little special touch that was different to the competitive set, added value. So there's a piece there on, if you really understand, like, what is that consumer need or desire that you're meeting in your physical product offering, I think that's really important. Second thing would be, how do you innovate in terms of the brand or in terms of the emotional benefit? And I spent some years working on dev, and I think the case for this is well articulated. If you think in terms of what dev brought when it conceptualized, real beauty, there were many people selling soap bars, cleansing bars. There were many people selling shampoo, etc. But being able to innovate on how that product was understood, the emotional benefit, again, I think hugely important in terms of how you can create significant value differentiation in that emotional space. And then coming on to the last 3 years at Kraft-Heinz, I think never has there been a moment in time for marketeers where innovation in the ways that we do marketing and just listening to Julie talk about some of the ways that Draftline and ABI have done that, but also for Kraft-Heinz, understanding the business model, right? So whether that's where's the margin pool and how do you rethink about your business model, your go-to-market. If I give you an example, during COVID, we launched Heinz to Home in the UK, which was a direct-to-consumer offering. Now, we turned that around in 3 weeks. And you may say,
Incredible.
well, direct-to-consumer is not rocket science. However, for CPGs, it's a space that traditionally not many CPGs with a B2C model have done very well. And it requires a very different approach and an understanding of where you can innovate in that value chain and that margin pool to do things differently. Could also be the way we think about creativity. So at the moment, how we innovate in our processes and how we innovate in how we get consumer insight, how we communicate, very, very different in perhaps how we've done it as Kraft-Heinz before, but I think for the industry at large as well. So 3 ways in my mind, that product offering, that functionally, how can you innovate? How can you innovate your brand, your emotional benefit you're offering? And then business models, margin pool, where can you think about process efficiencies, all really to think about how you can add value.
A lot to unpack there, but I think the value of these conversations is that there's such insights that we can draw from that. And as a father of 2 children, yeah, I can totally empathise with that. And the difference is substantial, particularly when there are 2. But equally, as someone who, as a father of 2 children, is trying to get back into running, again, the kind of product plays a really good role in both experiences in my life. So I totally understand that. What I love about the kind of information you've shared with us is you're not talking about anything that's necessarily new or cutting edge. What you're talking about is just really fantastic understanding of your audience and your business. Where we there get to the next kind of set of questions where I'm looking at, I guess, how do we work out on more of a kind of above the line campaign type view? Where do you drive your innovation in terms of that? Is it all still rooted in your just really in-depth knowledge of kind of brand and audience? And is it driven by research, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, again, I think innovation is relative, right? Because what may be innovative for one company, it may be a core capability. In another company, it may be their way of operating. But if you think about innovation in terms of how can you do things differently, do things better to drive that value, we have something at Kraft-Heinz called acts, not ads. And so when you think about historically how CPGs have thought about communication above the line, very much let us tell you the message that we would like you to understand. And so when we think today about the plethora of platforms, the amount of time that consumers don't spend thinking about your ads, whatever category that may be for, the way we try to understand our consumers is what's relevant to them in their lives, in moments they have alone with friends, and then how can we bring consumer communications at the speed of culture to really cut through in a different way, to be relevant, to not be interrupting, but to be perhaps commenting on culture and perhaps bringing some experience in a big or a small way. A couple of examples that spring to mind. So again, I think with COVID really changing our understanding of what consumers want, what they're looking for. In the Netherlands, we have a leading brand called Honig. Honig. It's a meal solutions brand.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first 2 weeks of COVID, we understood not only that our consumers relied on us and were shopping disproportionately for our products given their shelf stable high quality, but we also know the challenges that the pandemic brought for many people in terms of access to food, even the affordability of food. So we actually convened in the Netherlands a group of people, some amazing celebrities, some amazing people, to basically have a live stream dinner table concert. Okay.
Amazing.
Now, our core competence is certainly not live streaming. It's certainly not putting on concerts. Why did we do it? Because for the brand, we felt that was appropriate, given our role in society. And we did it to raise awareness and funds for one of our food bank partners that we wanted to not only support with physical product, but also to try and help them to raise awareness and raise more money. So from we don't know live streaming, that's not how we think about above the line, to we really want to do this. We believe it's of value to our consumers. It's our role to play as a brand. 10 days later, Live 8 was the concert. Hugely successful and raised a lot of meals additional. On a lighter hearted note, similarly, during lockdown, I think many businesses were pivoting, right, trying to understand what could they bring that was perhaps different or more value. And there was a piece of social listening we did, which was around something called Splatoon, which Michael, probably given the industry you're in,
yes,
is very familiar to you. But at the time I was like, I don't know what this is. Okay. And so what did we want to do? So there was an epic battle. Splatoon is a gaming competition, if you will. So you can have these epic battles on many different topics, but one of the most popular ones in the history of Splatoon was apparently ketchup versus mayo, 3 years back. Okay. And so Splatoon decided during lockdown, again, the consumer behavior, a lot of people spending many hours playing a lot of games. Okay. Mm-hmm. Makes total sense, right? If you're not watching Netflix box sets or a series, then there's millions of people across the world gaming. And so we decided that we wanted to be part of that, be part of the excitement and the conversations that led up to Splatoon, and go and champion, obviously, Team Ketchup. I can't think of a better brand to lead that team as Heinz. But a very different way of perhaps traditionally how we've thought and how CPG companies think about communications and when and how to show up.
Yeah, that's a really good example. We actually have a video, which I'm going to try and be brave and make Zoom play a video to 75 people. So bearing in mind, I'm supposed to be an expert in live streaming with my background, this could be career defining for me. So I think the thing I love about that, and we can come on to the questions after this, but is in our conversation, it was a nimble exercise. And so the fact that you are constantly listening to all this information, but there's a role for people bringing you opportunities and you having the degree of faith in them to understand that despite maybe it being a timeline that you wouldn't normally activate within, that the upside to your brand was so substantial that it was worth, I guess risk is the right word. It was worth taking a risk. But we'll come on to that. And for the love of God, I hope this video works. Can I get it? No. Are people seeing that?
Yeah.
Can you see that? You can see that, yeah? Okay. So I'm not sure if the sound played. Hopefully it did. If not, I feel like there's some kind of valuable things we can talk about on there. But first, how does an opportunity like that come to you? Is that via an agency? Is that internally just having an understanding of things that are going on in the market? I'd love some insight into what looks like a really nice campaign and how it was formed.
So when we think about insight and where ideas come from, absolutely, you know, we've got social listening. We're constantly thinking about what our consumers are talking about, what are they searching for, and so there's sometimes the internal opportunity, and sometimes our agency partners. You know, we work with amazing, fantastic agencies who understand our brands, understand us, and they feel comfortable in our relationship saying, hey, there's this great thing, should we do something? And so in this instance, one of our agency partners brought the idea, had actually seen this as a gamer himself and plays games with his son, Sean. He won't mind me mentioning him, I'm sure, and said, look, we're not sure if you're aware, but there's this amazing ketchup mayo battle coming. But by the way, they've just announced it and it's next week. We're like, okay. I'm sorry, it's called Splat what? Splatoon. Okay. And look, I'm not ashamed to say that, right? I have many interests, many hobbies. That's not one of them. But the reason I think you understand your brand, you understand your consumers, and then you bring valuable partners on is there may be ideas that perhaps you as a marketeer, as a brand leader, can't see. They're invisible to you. But understanding of your consumer, understanding of your brand, and then having your agency partners and having those trusting relationships is how you really get to really great ideas. And look, to your question on risk to reward, in some ways, someone's saying there's this great idea, it's in the gaming space, it's not a space that we've perhaps taken as much steps into as we should. I do understand that, you know, gaming is hugely relevant. I think the reach of all the different kinds of games is certainly huge.
Yes.
I think CPG perhaps as an industry is a little bit behind some other industries in how it understands the audience opportunity there. So with all that being said, I'm like, okay, this looks great. I think this is not without risk, right? Given we've never really done anything gaming, we're relying on our agency ecosystem, our media agency, our design agency, and then we actually brought on a fantastic agency who really understood the gaming space. And from the beginning of the relationship, we're talking about a week, right, done virtually, that look, we want to do this. We believe it's the right thing for our brand. We're very clear on where we think our brand can be relevant and not overstep. And we trust you as our agency partners to help us ensure that that's how we manage very, very closely the activity. And you saw some of the results there in terms of engagement. You know, the fans were absolutely delighted, be those the players of Splatoon or ketchup lovers. And for us, it's that taking that innovative space, taking perhaps things that we're not comfortable completely with. We may not have done this before to understand exactly where it's going, but taking that step in a mindful way with the right partners and being very, very pleased with the results and how our consumers and how the gamers in that space reacted warmly to us.
Yeah, as someone spent a lot of times in games, I think the thing that we've always seen across my career at various companies, that the reach of gaming is only going one way, which is fantastic, and certainly lockdowns fueled that, and obviously we at StreamElements being in that space are hugely, you know, benefiting from that. But the key defining success factor I see on that campaign with my background is that it was authentic activation. And what you've therefore done is you've come in and added value to an experience that already was crying out for the involvement of someone such as yourself, because like you said, it happened 3 years ago and it was hugely popular. You've come in and you've not sat there and tried to give too much information about the brand. You just complemented what was already a really valuable experience for players and viewers. And that is why I believe we've seen the kind of results that came up on screen for that campaign, which is great. You've obviously seen another campaign, which we talked about, which you don't have a video for, which is probably beneficial, as I apparently did not check the sound box, so I apologise for that. But the campaign that we wanted to kind of potentially talk about, very contemporary at the moment, is the Weetabix campaign that had obviously taken over pretty much every digital channel, every broadcast channel. You know, it was as big as a campaign as I've ever seen, and it felt very of that moment. Now, we discussed, you know, what does innovation mean around that campaign, and I'd love some insights for you, you know, on how that came to fruition, the kind of, you know, view that you have on that.
Yeah, Wheater beans, as we are fondly calling it internally, the breakfast of champions, right? I can't imagine there's anyone listening that isn't aware, but putting Heinz baked beans on your Weetabix as a breakfast opportunity is something that's been talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks. And in the spirit of, you know, how does that tie with innovation? A couple of things from Heinz's brand perspective. So Heinz in the UK, you know, a national treasure, hugely loved brand. In the context of communication, we have very strong paid communication, actually our editorial earned. So Good Morning appearances, Daily Mail headlines, Forbes, etc. We are now driving an incremental 50% of our reach from earned. Wow. Which is impressive. It's something we've been building over the last 3 years. But actually, for a company, you know, with such scale and doing some pretty innovative things with the brands generally, our appetite and our understanding of some of the social platforms, again, perhaps where we could improve. So no, Twitter is not a new platform, been around for a very long time, but for us, really making efforts and trying to understand how we can, you know, build those conversations and putting some more focus on it. So when the fantastic folks at Weetabix reached out and said, look, we have this campaign, we really believe that we could perhaps drive some conversation with a combination of, you know, two of the UK's most loved brands with Weetabix and Heinz baked beans. We said, okay, great, right? We absolutely saw this as perhaps a nice piece of social conversation. I think sometimes with these very big campaigns, of course, we would like to say, of course, we knew this was going to drive 400 million, make the morning breakfast shows, have people trying it, and you know, set the world on fire. I don't think that anyone can ever say that they knew how things would take off and go viral before it happened. I think you can plan as much as one could possibly plan to have the right conditions. Mm-hmm. But I think you need, again, that understanding of, do your brands have the right to play and have a conversation in this space? And that kind of relevance in culture, right? So thinking about communication at the speed of culture, and the stars aligned. So I think Weetabix and Heinz as those brands that everyone can relate to, with a moment in time where, you know, we're looking at lockdown fatigue, a moment of light relief. And look, from what started as a simple conversation between two brands to have so many brands, so many celebrities, embassies of countries, GCHQ, National Rail, Stephen Fry, and for that to continue then into broadcast, into editorial, as well as some opportunities to raise money with some footballers taking up the challenge with looking to support the work we're doing on breakfast at the moment. That for me is a perfect example of really taking things which are common elements, right? The brands have been around for a very long time. Twitter's not a new platform, but what we were able to achieve with that, with both of our brands, moving at the speed of the conversation, driving the conversation on the spot, thinking about then 48 hours later how that showed up in Sainsbury's stores, for example, or what that's led to in other opportunities, in my mind is how we, we really think at Kraft-Heinz we have a value of we dare to do better every day. And I think that mindset, that mindset of daring today to do something that we couldn't do yesterday, or we didn't do yesterday, or we were perhaps too scared to do yesterday.
Yeah.
That as the spirit that drives innovation and that drives innovative thinking and innovative things. Again, the payoff to the brands, not only I think the payoff to many people in the UK who I know for a fact, my one of my best friends, my mum, people are like, oh, it was just, I loved it. It was just what I needed. So, the moment of humor and light relief. And again, I would say to all of the brands and the institutions, right, that really engaged constructively in that conversation, who really all showed that same understanding of that cultural moment where we are with that lockdown kind of fatigue mentality, instant. So I think that's a fantastic example of taking similar, very common elements, but thinking about them perhaps in a different way, moving quickly, and the results we're super happy in terms of the reach and also how we're seeing that add to brand power, actually, because when you can get an entire country engaged and talking to you and with you, for big national brands such as Heinz and Weetabix, that starts showing up immediately as some of the data's come back on not only your brand awareness, but also in this instance translating into some short-term sales as well. So really great value add there.
It's really interesting. We've come to the end of our kind of allotted time before we move to the Q&A. But I think in summary, the thing that I found interesting when we first chatted on the phone and just listening to you and just the fascinating examples you've given me is not once do you stray away for these three principles. And it's clear that they're kind of throughout your experiences at different businesses, but the understanding of not innovation as something new, but innovation as something to just take the existing pillars of how to engage consumers for brands and just speak to them in ways that are relevant. And again, the last example we had, the levity, absolutely right. It was something that, we all looked at. I'm not on Twitter, but I instantly saw that in so many different ways. And my wife and I never talk about anything to do with advertising. She's a lawyer, so she has no interest in what I do. But again, this concept of communality, we're all in this experience together, and this additive experience that was driven by the two brands was absolutely powerful. So look, we'll move. I've got two Q&As popping up right now. So the first is actually telling me that there's no sound, which I don't think counts as a question. That should technically be in chat. You've got me excited that we had two questions there, but apologies, Ruben. The second is regarding the Splatoon example. So the question from Eileen McIntosh is, for Splatoon, the client approval process must have been significantly accelerated / shortened. Was this a difficult thing to achieve? How was this managed internally? And do you envisage that this fast approval system will continue into the future to allow you to be more agile / reactive to capitalize on opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. It's a great question. And look, again, I think that's really part of the spirit of how we operate in Kraft-Heinz, right? So we tend to be thinking in two dimensions: scale and agility. And so actually the speed we needed to move at with that campaign and the approvals process was actually very straightforward. It was WhatsApp. WhatsApp in terms of how we're thinking about getting the right assets, getting all the pieces we needed to get in place correct. And then you hear people talk about I don't know if I'm allowed to use the term war rooms, right? Command centers.
Yep.
And for this campaign, we had a command center. And, I'm like, what is a command center? Well, it's a room and there's big screens, everything's going on. Yeah. okay, maybe some companies you can have a whole room and all the screens. And don't get me wrong, you know, for big theatre pieces, you know, if you were going to take on sponsorship of the Olympics, right, or some of the big sports moments, yes, you probably do need, you know, a literal command center. But you can also get the right agency partners, the right team members that you trust, put them all on a WhatsApp, and in real time use that to approve things. So actually myself, Tiago in my team, and our agency partners, as that was going on, I can remember it went over a weekend, right? So I think it started on a Friday evening. It was on a global clock. It started on a Friday evening and ran for 40 hours. And throughout that time, there's social listening, there's an understanding of what's going on, things are coming in. I can remember there was one asset where it's like, look, we think this is a great asset. I'm like, oh, the chips look terrible, right? Great idea, terrible chips. Tiago, we've got a better picture of chips. 5 minutes later, what about this one? No, they're critical ones. They need to be straight ones. Change, go. So I think there's approvals and that speed and that agility. Tech can help with that, and certainly, you know, there's never been more platforms and more software to do it, but it ultimately comes back to, if you understand your brands and you trust your partners, you can move at the speed of light. It also helps if something has a very hard and real deadline, right? So in that
Yes.
instance, you know, what are you going to do? Spend a day on a post? The conversation moved 23 hours and 30 minutes ago. So you need to have that appetite and be willing and able to move. But then how you do that, I think there's so many flexible ways, and that's just a real example of, you know, how we did that. For some other campaigns, we don't necessarily have the command center, but perhaps more, you know, social listening, etc. It really depends on the scale and the speed and the amount of content that you're looking to produce and serve, depending on the brand and the circumstance. So I hope that answers the question, Eileen.
I think that's a very comprehensive answer, so thank you for sharing that. So if anyone else has any more questions, please send them through. Otherwise, I think there's a couple that I can ask based on the previous example that we've just had. I'll give it a few seconds to see if anything pops in. So in terms of the kind of experience, you talked about the quick turnarounds. Do you think that was indicative of the new world that we found ourselves in? Was that a result of the pandemic and COVID, or would you have always seen that level of agility before, I guess, everything turned upside down?
Personally, I've seen that level of agility before. For some of the big global Dove campaigns, master brand campaigns that I used to run, actually, again, same principles, right? Very clear understanding of the brand, fantastic team, and we were very nimble, moving assets, moving content, moving media spend. So do I think it's specific to the conditions we found ourselves in? No. I do think, though, as brands increasingly want to be relevant, the benefit of having a well-defined marketing plan, media plan, of course, I would still absolutely expect all of my teams and would suggest that being clear on your strategy and then being able to flex makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't want to manage, you know, my brand portfolio and my year where everything is, you know, we need this in half an hour. But I think being able to adjust that speed and adjust that understanding is a skill set that marketers increasingly will rely on. I think what COVID has done is really force all of us, you know, across so many dimensions, to really be able to pivot, to really be able to, you know, think about the fundamentals, but then with the risk and reward understanding, move pretty quickly. I think that's here to stay. But as part of a well thought through approach, and the change of gears is hopefully, you know, as things start to perhaps become a little bit more stable, not quite so many pivots as we're understanding the world we're in now, how we should think about that speed piece and that agility piece.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of, you've talked social listening, you've talked about the kind of experience of understanding what your consumer is experiencing. Does that also give you insight into maybe when to go quiet as a brand, to do the absolute inverse and pull back from your communications, for example? Is that something that you have to take into account, are taking into account?
Absolutely, and I think before the social listening, that really comes down to brand strategy, right? So just because a conversation is topical does not mean it's appropriate for any brands to perhaps have a point of view. So I would suggest before you even get to the kind of social listening, understanding what conversations are happening, being very clear on the role you play in consumers' lives, your beliefs, your brand values, and therefore when and how it's appropriate to engage in certain conversations. And absolutely, Michael, in certain conversations, you have no right necessarily as a brand just to kind of step foot into everything. So yes, absolutely would be the answer. Sometimes it's best not to say anything.
So I see Lisa has joined us. Hello.
I have. Hello, we're at time. Thank you so much for that session. It was fantastic. I've written down some key themes that I think have come through. I was really interested in that idea of innovation rooted in real consumer insight, and the fact that innovation will be really different for different brands. I think the major theme that I took from the conversation was about moving fast, and I wondered, Victoria, how much of that speed is now